This is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. We're watching Maxime Vachier-Lagrave face off against Magnus Carlsen from the World Blitz and Rapid 2021. We have a handshake, and let's see how the game begins. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Will we see a Ruy Lopez? Yes, we will. We have a6, bishop a4. This is a mainline Ruy Lopez that they're currently following. MVL is a specialist in this line. I think this is a good choice by white. So far, b5. This is completely normal stuff. Now, will Magnus go d6? No, he castles. Looks like he's angling to play the Marshall with d5. MVL responds to the anti-Marshall a4. Now, this is featured heavily in the Magnus Nepo World Championship match. So Magnus, he's got a lot of experience in these positions. d3. Probably we're going to see d6 by black. There we go. These are all very standard Ruy Lopez moves. The knight from d2 often comes over to f1 and then to g3. And Magnus, the first to take a little bit of a think here. There's many ways that black can arrange his pieces here. Rook e8. Probably going to play bishop f8 and then maybe fianchetto that bishop. Here comes MVL's knight, knight f1. Magnus responds with h6. Okay, so he stops white's knight or bishop from getting to g5. That's a pretty reasonable move as well. Perhaps MVL will complete the maneuver with knight g3. He takes a little bit of a longer think himself. c3, another standard move for the Spanish. And there goes bishop f8. Magnus could still play g6, bishop g7 here as MVL gets his knight to e3 rather than g3. He wants his knight a little bit closer to the center. And Magnus about to go knight e7, covering that f5 square. Position still looks very balanced. It's kind of the calm before the storm, but we know this is a blitz game. Things can explode at any second. MVL taking a little bit of time. He could play a general improving move such as h3, and he does, covering that g4 square. Knight g4 could become an idea, and Magnus gets his own knight over to g6. So somewhat symmetrical arrangement of pieces here. Will MVL get his knight to f5 now? That would exploit the drawback of black's last move, but he's also got to watch for d6, d5. Magnus could push that pawn in the center and exploit the weakness of MVL's d3 pawn. So big moment here for white. MVL taking his time. The b5 pawn can also be captured at any moment by white, so both sides have to watch that very closely. And MVL taking a while, and he goes knight back to h2. He wants that knight to maneuver to g4. That's a pretty standard maneuver for these types of positions, but he's given Magnus a chance to go d5. Magnus very ambitious in blitz. I think he's going to go d5. Let's see. He's taking his time. You can sense the wheels turning in his head. Is he going to push that d pawn and try to open up the center? And there he goes, d5. And now the position has begun to heat up. Now the e4 pawn is hanging from three different directions. I think MVL has to take on d5. But then Magnus's bishop comes alive. The pawn on d3 could end up getting targeted by black. This looks like a pretty good position for Magnus so far. E takes d5, knight takes d5. MVL getting his queen to f3. Ooh, that's a nice move. That bishop on b7 is hanging. So if Magnus takes the knight on e3, both f7 and b7 are hanging. I think Magnus has missed that move. You can tell by his body language. The bishop on b7 being undefended is a big problem. He goes knight h4, kicking the queen away. But MVL does have the move queen e4 now to keep that pin alive. Then we could get some absolute pandemonium if Magnus takes the knight on e3. Let's see where MVL puts his queen. He can play queen g3. He can play queen e4. A lot to calculate here. And this is a blitz game, so he's going to have to make a decision fast. Let's see MVL continuing to think. Well, if he doesn't play queen e4, then Magnus is going to take the knight on e3 and then take that pawn on g2 because he's going to have his bishop on b7 and his knight on h4 attacking that pawn. So I think queen e4 is necessary, and he plays it. Knight takes e3. He takes the bishop, and Magnus is going to snap off that pawn on g2. This looks really good for black, but I'm a little bit worried for Magnus's knights here. That knight on g2, where is it going to go? And the knight on h4, that entire construction looks really, really flimsy, but white's king also incredibly weak. This is an incredibly sharp position. Rook up to e4, pressuring the knight on h4. That knight cannot move, or Magnus will lose the knight on g2. He could play knight back to f4, but that would involve giving the pawn back up. Magnus hesitating. He doesn't seem too thrilled with this course of events. Queen takes d3 as he snaps another pawn off the board. MVL does have the move rook g4, and he plays it, and now he's threatening to take the knight on g2 and get two pieces for a rook, which in a middle game I think is pretty good. Also, if you look at that bishop on b3, that bishop is completely uncontested, and it's pressuring the f7 pawn. I think in a blitz game, this is a pretty good position for white. It looks really scary, but I don't see how Magnus can untangle himself on the king side. He doesn't look too happy. Queen d1 check, not possible. The bishop is controlling that square. Ooh, Magnus is in a little bit of difficult territory here. How is he going to handle this? He continues to take his time. He can take the pawn on h3. That will be 3 pawns. But then MVL can drop his rook back to g3 and then take the knight on g2. This is looking really good for white. I just don't see a satisfactory move for Magnus, and neither does he. If he moves either of his knights, then he loses the other knight because they're defending each other. Magnus leaning back in his chair, doesn't seem to find a good move. He's getting low on time as well. What is he going to do? Is he going to take that pawn on h3? He might not have any other choice, and still not moving. MVL's got to be feeling pretty confident at this point. There's quite the crowd gathering around Magnus's board. What is he going to play here? Looks really unhappy. MVL hasn't changed his pose in a while. And he grabs the pawn on h3, but doesn't look like he's too happy doing it. Rook g3 now is a possibility, kicking the queen away and then taking on g2. That'll give white 2 pieces for a rook and a big attack on black's king. There he goes, rook g3. Magnus has to drop his queen back. Where is he going to go? Queen out back to f5. And MVL's probably going to take that knight on g2. And he's going to get those 2 pieces for a rook. And he's going to get his queen back to g2 to x-ray the black king. This is looking really, really iffy for black. MVL, he takes the knight on g2. Magnus has to take back. And queen drops back, takes the knight on g2. Now bishop takes h6 as a threat. Magnus ignores it. He brings his rook into the game. MVL gets his knight into the game. Finally, knight g4. Now he threatens to take on h6 with a fork. Magnus might have to move his king. But if Magnus moves his king, well, MVL's got a lot of action here on the king side. Yeah, he hesitates. I think he's got to go king h8 or king h7. Which one of those is he going to choose? King, nope. Still hesitating. He's really low on time now. He's going to go fast, king h8. MVL could take on b5 and open up that a file, and he does. Now his rook is controlling an uncontested file. His pieces are really well placed, but Magnus has 3 whole pawns and a rook for 2 pieces. That's a lot of material. This is a very double-edged position, but this looks practically fun to play for MVL. Knight back to f1. I think he's going around to g3. Magnus pushes the center pawn e4, trying to create more pressure, more space. Knight out to g3. Where is the queen going to go? Queen back to g6. MVL gets his bishop out to e3. He's completed his development. Magnus's bishop over to d6. He might take that knight on g3, but then MVL is going to have 2 bishops. 2 very, very strong bishops. Will MVL get his rook into the game? No. Knight back to e2, offering a queen trade. Queen trade doesn't look too bad for black, but Magnus declines at queen h5. Interesting decision there. That could end up being very risky if MVL gets an attack against black's king. Knight back to g3. Will Magnus repeat moves? Will MVL repeat moves, or is he just buying himself time? No, Magnus doesn't repeat. He takes the knight. What a committal decision. That leaves MVL with these 2 monster bishops. I don't know about that one, but rook comes into d3, attacking the bishop on e3. Where is MVL going to put that bishop? He's going to defend it with queen f2. Now Magnus could play queen f3 and offer a queen trade, but he doesn't seem intent on that. He pushes his f-pawn down the board. If Maxime can get those bishops a little bit more active, as he chases the rook away, he's going to get a pretty strong attack on black's king. Magnus moves it back. King g2, preparing rook h1. White's pieces coming into the king side. This isn't looking great for black. I don't know about Magnus's decision to reject the repetition. Bishop f4, rook back to d5. He keeps chasing the rooks away. MVL hesitating. Bishop b3 looks possible, chasing the rook even further. He goes queen e2, centralizing his queen. This still looks a lot easier to play for white. Both sides in acute time pressure as Magnus sends his c-pawn down the board. How is MVL going to continue here? Bishop b3 allows c4. He goes b3. Magnus goes c4. Now, if MVL takes the pawn on c4, black has rook d2 check, so he gets his rook to f1. Magnus attacking f6. Now he takes on c4. And now rook d2 check doesn't work anymore because Maxime will have rook f2 in the end. I think Magnus missed that. There goes 1 pawn. Okay, rook d2 now a threat. MVL gets his bishop out of dodge. Rook c5. Where's the queen going to go? Queen b4 allows rook b5. Is he going to lose his bishop? No, queen f7. He keeps contact with that bishop. Magnus takes on c3. And bishop b5. That's a fork. He attacks the rook and he threatens checkmate. How does Magnus defend against that? Now just king h3. King h4, king h1. There's no more checks. I think Magnus is going to lose. He's losing a rook and he's going to be down 2 bishops. And he resigns. What an incredible game. And MVL defeats Magnus in a time scramble. And for more of these videos, make sure to click the link to the playlist. I was Grandmaster Daniel Narditsky watching MVL and Magnus face off at the World Blitz Rapid 2021.